So welcome everybody to our 60th episode of Agile Shorts. Today we're going to talk about, we're going to continue the talk that Kumar had about Agile veneer a few weeks ago. And what really prompted this was Kumar and I were talking and he remembered the post by Dave Thomas. So Kumar, I'll kick it over to you. Do you want to give us a kind of a summary of what was in the post?
Yeah, I was thinking about our Agile Fundamentals course, and I don't know what tickled my brain. Something about what I was thinking at the time, it made me remember that Dave Thomas, one of the signatories of the manifesto, wrote a post back 9 years ago he titled it "Agile is Dead, Long Live Agility." And that post, when it was written, it resonated with me. And this is in 2014, 9 years ago, when Agile was still all the rage. It still kind of is, but it was interesting back then. It's like, what? Agile is dead? Well, what do you mean it's dead? This is from someone that's written the manifesto. And what he was bemoaning was the fact that Agile became a word. You're doing Agile wrong, or Agile was appended in front or behind anything like Agile programming, as if that's the thing, or Agile coaching, which is a thing, kind of. But so he was bemoaning that sort of trivialization of the word Agile and the use of it back in 2014. And so I thought that would be interesting for us to talk about here in 2023, 9 years later. 14, Agile was still, very much alive. Yes, the whole Agile industrial complex was busy turning out consultants with all sorts of certifications. And I think that was the one thing that he was really talking about in his post back in 2014, that it missed the point of Agile. It wasn't a verb. It was a mindset. It was about it's about agility, about the outcomes. Were you going to say something, Chris?
No, you're doing fine. Go ahead.
Okay. It was about the outcomes that you get. It wasn't that you became an Agile programmer. It's that as a developer, you developed in a way that embraced agility. You embraced experimentation and learning. You embraced coding small things, test-driven development. So you embraced that test-driven approach to code small things, get some feedback, and then correct it. That was coding with agility, or developing with agility. And so that was kind of lost. And this is something he wrote in 2014. And I was curious, as I was sort of coming up with a post about our fundamentals class, our foundations class. And I was just curious what you thought about that post written 9 years ago, in 2023.
I thought it was interesting that, he wrote that post in 2014, that was 9 years ago. And to have that foresight then to see what it was becoming, what the whole Agile movement was becoming, I was pretty impressed by that. I mean, he was an original, as you mentioned, he's an original signatory. And I thought it was really interesting because he was pointing out, for example, one of the comments in there was, well, somebody's got a certification because they sat through a 2-day class. And so they're a Scrum Master, but yet he who's never been to a class, who's been doing it for 20 years, is not. And it makes me wonder when people are going to start paying attention to that. We've all worked in environments where we've either met people or been a part of projects where we're pushing Agile and we're pushing people to become Agile. And, it's just like, follow these steps. We don't deal with the mindset. We don't deal with, helping them understand not only what they're supposed to do, but why they're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
And I just, to have that foresight 9 years ago was just amazing. It's interesting we're at 22 with the Agile. If you go back to the manifesto, we're 22 years in, and somebody 12 years ago, or I'm sorry, 9 years ago, saw it and said, wait a minute, this is not going the way it should. And yet we've continued down this path.
I think if you've heard us on other videos. I mean, certainly Agile Veneer is one of them, right? So the sort of superficial Agile thing. We've talked about this in the past, even on our videos on the Scaled Agile Framework. We've talked about the Scaled Agile Framework is probably a great example of what Dave Thomas is talking about. And at its core, the Scaled Agile Framework sits on the shoulders of giants, right, that have created these frameworks. It's very polarizing, though, SAFe is. And it's really what Dave Thomas is talking about. It's a certification factory. You go and get all these certifications to do something that may not be necessary. Maybe that role isn't really needed. Maybe it's really just focusing on the basics. And the way Dave Thomas puts it, when you do something in an Agile fashion, it's really 4 simple steps. Figure out where you are now. What is it that's working for you, not working for you? Figure out where you're starting from. Take a small step towards the goal you want to get to. You want to improve the way you code. You want to reduce the number of defects. What's one small thing you can do to get fewer defects? And then measure it. Adjust your understanding based on what you've learned. And then repeat the cycle. That's the core of agility. And that's, for me, I try to do. I know that's what you try to do, Chris. And so when you think of something like SAFe, and I don't want to pick on SAFe, less, you name it, all of these scaling frameworks have added a lot of complexity to something as simple as PDCA, plan, do, check, act. Right? Of course, he doesn't say PDCA, but it's his version of it. And I don't know, how do we get back to basics, Chris?
I wish there was an easy answer to that. It's difficult because if you think about the fact that CIO/CTO, what's the average life of a CTO in a job? Most of the time, it's somewhere between 3 and 4 years. And so a CTO comes in and we're going to do SAFe, and they start going through the change and go through the process. Then they go take another job and somebody else comes in. They are inheriting something that's, typically halfway through, and they throw it out and start all over. We look at Capital One, and, the rumor around Capital One is that SAFe is no longer at Capital One. That's being, it's being pulled out of there. So it's I think to make it where it works is we need to go back and reinforce that mindset. I personally think SAFe is a great way to get a large organization started on the Agile process, but you've got to understand that you just can't use SAFe by the book. You have to go through and implement it where it makes sense. And things that aren't working or things that are working, don't fix them yet. Only fix the things that are broken. Don't go around looking for problems and continue on. And I think SAFe, for example, or less gives you, it's kind of like you implement this framework and you're good, you're done. And so CTOs and CIOs are looking for quick fixes to get them in and get them in, make their mark, get some improvements. And here come the snake oil salesmen. Right? So buy less, buy SAFe, buy Nexus, buy lean project management, whatever scaling approach you take, you're always being sold a bill of goods. And just like the snake oil salesman of the days have gone by, every once in a while, there's something that actually works to solve a problem, but it doesn't solve every single problem. It won't get stains out of your clothes and solve emphysema. It just doesn't do that. Those scaling frameworks don't do that. It's not one size fits all. And I think we, as CTOs and CIOs and leaders, we need to understand that going forward, there's just not one specific answer that works in all cases. It's a journey we're going on. And we should plan on making that journey, not just implementing something, a silver bullet, to solve a problem, to solve a perceived problem.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. There's still lots of big Agile implementations out there in large companies, and they're using frameworks like this to help solve problems. And I think that's all fine and good. To your example, Capital One being an important one because they basically got rid of all their Agile roles. The Scrum Masters went away. The product owners went away. They didn't go away. Of course, there's those people to a large extent still exist, but they embrace this notion of Agile is dead, long live agility. I think there's still, Capital One is, I don't know this for a fact, but my suspicion is that they're still enmeshed with this idea, in strong agreement with the idea of agility. We want to operate with agility. We want to be nimble and quick to respond to market changes and all of those things. But we don't need this what started out as a lightweight framework. We don't need this heavy framework. As long as everyone understands how to operate with agility, whether you're a team leader or, I think they call them delivery leads now and the Scrum Masters, right? Or you're a manager or you're a product manager, whatever the role is, how do you operate with agility? How do you empower the people that are closest to the work to make decisions and those types of things? And so I would say that Capital One it's not that they got rid of SAFe. I think they matured beyond what these frameworks can provide them.
It's a good way to look at it. Yeah, that would be the ideal, right? Is that you bring in a framework, it helps you scale up to a certain point, and then as an organization, to your point, people operate with agility. So therefore, they're communicating, they're collaborating, they're deciding, they're working in small batches, they're prioritizing what they're going to do, they're making the right decisions at the portfolio level. You don't need that framework. You don't need some of the overhead that goes with that framework or all the other frameworks for that matter.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, what we try to do with our company, this is not meant to be like an advertisement for what we do, but that's how we try to operate, Chris. I know you do, and I certainly wouldn't want to work with you if you didn't operate that way. And our partners, Jolly and Mike, we while we have relationships with Scaled Agile Framework and IC Agile and these certification bodies, we take pride, and I know you do too, Chris, in creating learning experiences that focuses on the outcome, which is the outcome being able to operate with more agility, not the certification so much. Right. And we haven't been as successful spreading that message. And also, I think the Agile industrial complex has created demand for certifications to the point that where I think the learning is not as important. It's deprioritized amongst lots of people. And I'm hoping that we can change that in some way. Prioritize the learning, prioritize what you get out of these courses as something more important than just the certification. It's important, but just like in the manifesto, you've got things on the left and things on the right, and so a manifesto for learning would be focus on the learning is more important than the certification. Certifications might be important, but the learning is more important. Right. And that's true with any transformation. If you're doing it when the people in the company, in the organization are always learning and growing and being able to adapt to new situations. What do you think?
I just had lunch with one of our clients, and it was kind of interesting because it was one that I've done work with personally over the last 5 or 6 years, on and off. And we were talking about, we had done some training for them around our APO, our Agile Product Owner Certification. And they were telling me how much value they got out of the course. And never once did they mention certification, even though everybody in that class got their certifications. And then subsequently, we did another class, again, focused on the learning outcomes. Now they're coming back and going, hey, we got some new people out of the organization. We need to do another class. And it's really interesting because as I meet with them and talk to them about how things are going, they're focused on just that. They're focused on outcomes. They could care less, to your point, they could care less about the certifications. So I think that's a really good point. I think certifications helped early, and what it didn't, and that was an easy way for somebody who didn't know Agile to interview or wasn't familiar with the mindset and the concepts and the values. It was an easy way for them to hire. They could go in and hire somebody and say, okay, yeah, he's certified. That kind of proves you've got a base knowledge. They didn't have to dig into that piece. And it gave them some comfort. But it's much like the other certifications that we talk about, the PMP. The PMP is another one that got, for a long time, was highly valued, still is in some circles today. And just because you got a PMP doesn't mean you're a great project manager. So same thing with doctors, right? Somebody graduates from medical school. you may not want them operating on you. So yeah, the certification is important, but to your point, the learning is what people need to focus on. And then what are those outcomes? I think we'll see that over time, kind of how you've seen the development world shift from where developers had to go to college. Back when I started, most developers went to college to learn how to program, and then they go out into the real world.
Yeah.
And then what happened is now you can go to a boot camp, spend 13 weeks in a boot camp and code, come out.
Well, actually, now you can.
And so that's
now you can just enlist ChatGPT and as a co-pilot and have a code for you.
Yeah. And so, so the value of having a college degree has gone down. You end up with a lot of debt, potentially. You spend 4 years of your life. You don't earn anything. You can go to a boot camp and make that up in 13 weeks. And that's good and wonderful. But the industry has matured and figured out how to know when a developer is a good developer or not. I think we have to develop that same maturity of how we're, what kind of employees do we need going above and beyond developers to be agile, whether it's a product owner or whether it's a business executive. We need to start looking at how people do and what the outcomes they produce are, and less about the certification.
Yeah, I agree. Certifications are still important, of course, and what we try to do, of course, is offer both the learning experience and the certification, so we can focus more on agility and less on, agile, just pure agile. Here's your agile cert. It should have something more meaningful, more valuable than that, in my opinion. That, okay, you've got my cert, and now I can actually, I feel like I have a new capability that I can apply to my work that allows me to operate with more agility. So that should be the goal. But I think we have work to do. I don't know about you, but I feel like I see it in the job market. That there's downward pressure on rates for Scrum Masters. That there are lots of people that are out there looking for this type of work, and not as many jobs available. Is that just my imagination, Chris, or do you see that as well?
Yeah, I see that as well. You see people. You see Scrum Masters, for example. You used to be six figures around here before COVID, and now it's something less than that. It's come down. And you also have a pool of people that are out there now that have been trained. And so the demand for Scrum Masters is not going to be as much as what it has been for the certifications. Yeah. So I think you're going to see that job will tend to become more, it will either have to evolve or it's going to go away. It's going to be significantly reduced in terms of skills and what have you. Although a good Scrum Master can save your team and your company a lot of money.
Yes.
So
if they're focused on the right things, if they're focused on the ability to operate with agility, and if they're coaching their team to do that, and you don't have to be a Scrum Master, you can still play that role of coaching the team, of guiding the team, of mentoring the team, of supporting them in building those capabilities. And I think that's the point that Dave Thomas makes in this blog post, that we can kind of shift the mindset to what do we need to do to operate with more agility. I think that's a better outcome than, hey, let's go train everybody and get the XYZ certification because that will get us where we need to go. No, that alone, no, is not going to do that. So I think we've maybe exhausted this one.
I think so.
All right.
I think so.
Well, thanks for indulging me on another rant. I'll just close by saying that this is probably one of the reasons. I mean, this has been around for a long time. Agile's been around, like to your point, for 22 years. 22 years. And I remember early on, like in 2000, I loved it because the focus was more on the outcomes back then, not so much on the certs. I loved it. I was a developer. I loved it. And more often today, it's very polarizing. People either hate it or they tolerate it. Or maybe some people love it. I still love it, but I love it for a different set of reasons, not because of the certs. And I actually had a chance to coach someone recently, and he almost didn't pick me as his coach because he was turned off by my heavy involvement and experience with Agile. Because he worked in an Agile environment. It was not a good experience for him. And so he was like, I don't want this Agile guy coaching me. So that is an interesting point. It's one data point. Doesn't mean anything, but maybe it means something. I don't know. What do you think?
You know, you see that a lot. I mean, you see that there's a lot of people out there that Agile is a bad thing. It's a bad word. I was talking to a former colleague of mine, and she's at a different company, and she was talking about going in and coaching. She's an Agile coach within the organization, and they're not supposed to say the word Agile because there's been so many starts and stops that the term Agile is now a bad term. So they don't really talk about Agile. They talk about improving what you're doing, continuous improvement, focus on your outcomes, focus on small batches, but they don't use the word Agile because it carries such a bad connotation to the rest of the organization. And I think that's true.
I think so. And it's interesting. We've cleaned up our language as well, or the things that we're offering as services. We don't really use a whole lot of Agile in our service offerings. We've cut the jargon out, and we're focusing a lot more on the outcomes that we hope to produce. So I think maybe that's where things are going. You know, Agile is not the techniques and the skills that you need to operate with agility. Those aren't going anywhere. You still need those, but maybe the language will change. It'll be more focused on outcomes and less on the certs.
I hope so.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for indulging me in this conversation. I appreciate it.
Sure.
And
anytime. Love to talk to you.
Great. All right. See you all next time. Thank you.